Most people get this wrong. They think it's something they do, right? So I want to influence people. I need to take a communications course, or I need to learn how to handle objections. It's all skill based. But what we don't understand is that we don't make the decision about whether we're influential or not. Everybody else makes the decision about whether we're influential or not. If every single one of you in this room was looking more at character traits than skills, then doesn't it beg the question, could that possibly be what people are looking for in you? One of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got was be a voice, not an echo. The problem with most thought leaders is they don't think. They're not coming up with their own ideas. They're just reading something and passing it along as though it's theirs.
You're spot on.
This is Sparta!
Welcome back to Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick, and this is your podcast for leadership, inspiration, and impact. And today will be no different. I got a great guest chiming in from Chattanooga, Tennessee, Chris Widener. This is one of the top 50 speakers in the world, member of the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame, and a man mentored by the legends Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, and John Maxwell. He's delivered over more than 2,500 speeches, authored 25 books in 14 languages, and now leads Chris Widener Ministries, focused on revival and spiritual formation in America. His latest work, The Coming American Revival, is endorsed by leaders from business, politics, entertainment, and faith. Chris is here not just to share ideas, but to challenge us to lead with conviction, communicate with purpose, and live lives that matter. Chris, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, Josh, thanks for having me.
Man, I'm so excited to get into this conversation, and big shout out to our friend Steve Ram for introducing us. And I always like to do this before we dive into leadership and influence. Can you walk us through a little bit of your own story? Like, how did you go from ministry to business to becoming one of the world's most sought after speakers?
Well, I'll try and keep it short. My dad was the fifth partner at an architecture firm named NBBJ. Now, all of the architects listening went, wow, NBBJ. Everybody else, it's one of the top 15 architecture firms in the world. They did the Google campus. And in 1969, he made $90,000. And in 1970, over the course of 6 months, he died at the age of 41 with cancer. Well, the biggest problem was he didn't have life insurance. And so he had like $30,000 worth. So he'd make it 90 and he had 30. He should have had at least 4 or 5 million, and, that began a downward spiral because my mom couldn't afford the $400 a month mortgage payment for a house that recently sold in Seattle for $3.8 million. So, my mom had not worked outside the house much for the last 10 or 15 years. And so she got into real estate. She'd always wanted to do real estate. We started flipping houses and things like that. Well, long story short, 28 homes, 11 different schools, shipped off to live with relatives twice, once in the 4th grade, once in the 9th grade, started drugs in the 6th grade, made most of my money growing up betting the horses at Long Acres Horse Track. Probably not the kind of thing that you want your 13-year-old doing. But probably the only thing that saved me was I was a ball boy for the Seattle Supersonics. I got the job at 11. And so from 11 until 18, 7 years, I worked for the Seattle Supersonics, won an NBA championship in 1979, and was in a ticker tape parade at the age of 13 through downtown Seattle with 500,000 people. But I was still kind of these two lives, right? I had a great thing with being a ball boy for the Sonics and lots of great mentors there. Dennis Johnson, was close with Dennis Johnson, ultimately became really famous with the Celtics. Larry Bird called him his greatest teammate he ever had. And then also all the crazy stuff I was involved in. Summer before my senior year, I was spending the night with my biggest pot smoking buddy. And Sunday morning, his mom threw open the door and said, "Get up, we're going to Sunday school." Now, my family was so irreligious that I literally had no idea what Sunday school was. Like, I was like, I've done Monday through Friday school. What's Sunday school? But then I thought I've tried everything else. So I went to Sunday school. They had a youth minister there, a good old boy from Helena, Montana. And he had two things I needed at that stage of my life. Number one, size 11 cowboy boots, if you know what I mean. I needed a man to kick me in the butt because I'd never really had any male role models. And then he told me that God had a plan for my life. So I became a Christian at the age of 17. Went to Bible college, got a degree in youth ministry. First job out of college was in a little tiny town called Mendham, New Jersey, one of the wealthiest zip codes in the country. And all these kids in my youth groups, a lot of their dads became my mentor. So my first mentors were the number 2 guy at Prudential, a former NFL quarterback, the former CEO of Sealand Corporation, and then the guy who really was a benefactor and a mentor was the CEO of Mars Candies. And so I had a lot of great mentors in my life. And so I became a pastor, moved back out to Seattle, started 3 churches in the Seattle area, very entrepreneurial endeavor. You know, I didn't go to churches that were already established, had to build them from the ground up. And then in 2002, started writing and speaking full time and found myself with 3 amazing mentors. And I'm going to mention a 4th because he passed away yesterday. But John Maxwell, I ghost wrote for John for 2 years. I spent 2 years co-hosting Zig Ziglar's television show. And then I spent all 7 years working with Jim Rohn and wrote his last book, a book called 12 Pillars. But then there was another guy who was very good to me and opened a lot of doors for me, a guy named Dennis Waitley. Dennis passed away yesterday, and Dennis was the first guy to ever produce an audio program that sold $100 million worth. And this was in the 70s. So we're probably talking $300 million worth. Now it was called Psychology of Winning. And so from there, my career took off, having those mentors and being mentioned alongside of them. And that's how everybody kind of got to know me, was working with those guys. And so one of the great lessons out of that is it's okay to be second fiddle as long as first fiddle is really amazing and world famous. So I've actually thought about writing a book, The Power of Playing Second Fiddle. And that just opened up a ton of doors for me, working with those guys. So that's the 2 or 3 minute version of how I got here.
Man, a lot of great mentors played a role in your life.
Amazing mentors. I mean, that's been my biggest blessing, starting when I was a ball boy, and Dennis Johnson taking me under his wing, and some amazing stories with Dennis and all of them. So mentorship is something I'm really focusing on now. About a year ago, I was shaving, and I was 58 at the time. I just turned 59. And as I was shaving, I felt God say to me, "You're the old man now." And I knew instantaneously what he meant. I'm the age that all those guys were when they took me under their wing. And it was almost like this redirecting of what I'm doing with life. And so I'm really trying to focus in on working with and mentoring guys, 30 to 45 years old, who I can help cut their time frame off, help them avoid some mistakes. A lot of times the best thing we can hear is, "Don't do that."
Yeah.
I wish a few more people would have told me over the years, "Don't do that." But anyway.
Well, you found yourself in a great position at 17, right? I think that was the time frame where you met those great mentors. I think that there's probably someone listening to this right now that's younger. Maybe they're not 17, maybe they're in their 20s, and they don't know where to find a great mentor. What advice would you give them?
Well, you have, you have sort of informal mentors and you have formal mentors. Formal mentors are the people you pay, you join a coaching program, something like that. Informal mentors are people that are, I would say, at least 15 years further ahead along the road than you are. And I would just pick it by industry. So maybe you're a 24-year-old, you want to get into real estate investing. You want to start buying duplexes or things like that. Find a real estate agent that's been there for 30 years in your community. Find an investor. They have investors meetings in your town, probably. You can find them on Meetup and some of those other places. Find somebody who's further down the road, and then ask them if you can take them to lunch. And here's tip number 1, you buy lunch. Don't ask somebody to help you and then make them pay for lunch. So you want to pay for lunch and cultivate relationship. It can be formal, it can be informal, but, get yourself around people who've been there, done that. They're going to help you with things to do. They're going to help you with things not to do. They're going to encourage you. They're going to cut your learning curve down. But, I always say, when I go into a room, I want to be the dumbest, poorest guy in that room. That means I'm around people who are further ahead than I am. If I'm the dumbest, poorest guy in every room, it means that I'm around some really great people. And I have found myself to be the dumbest and poorest guy in a lot of rooms, and it's always turned out well for me.
It's great advice. I wanted to get that out there because I've heard so many times where people, didn't know where to find that mentor. And a lot of it is just them not asking, because us, especially us men, for whatever reason, and I'm guilty of this, we have a problem with asking for help. So Chris just gave you some great advice. Buy someone lunch and see where that relationship takes you. And by the way, it may not be the first person that takes you under their wing. It may be the fifth person. But keep going about it, keep asking, and keep seeking that person that can really take you under their wing. So what do most people misunderstand about influence? I mean, you're speaking on stages all the time. You've ministered and mentored and started churches, lots of different people. How would you define it differently? What do most people get wrong about influence?
Well, most people get this wrong. They think it's something they do, right? So I want to influence people. I need to take a communications course, or I need to take I need to learn how to handle objections. It's all skill-based. But what we don't understand is that we don't make the decision about whether we're influential or not. Everybody else makes the decision about whether we're influential or not. And so we have to put ourselves into their mindset and say, when they're looking at me, what are they thinking? And how will they decide whether or not they want to take my advice or let me influence them? And I do this in my seminars, and I'll try to get through it pretty quickly. I ask the entire audience, and I've done this with over 1 million people and with crowds as large as 7,000 people. I say, I want you to write down 10 words, single words, when you think about a great leader or a great influencer. It could be somebody you know. It could be somebody who's just famous. It could be a politician, business leader, coach, whatever. Write down 10 words. They write down, and I usually put them in groups of 2 or 3. Then after they write their 10 words, I say, I want you to go back through there, and I want you to write a C or an S next to each one. A C is a character trait, integrity, for example. An S is a skill, great communicator or something like that. I have done this, again, with 1 million people. I don't know how many times that represents, but I've asked them then to add them up and create a percentage. That's one of the reasons I use 10. So if they have 7 and 3 or 6 and 4, it's really easy. Then I ask them, okay, I want you to raise your hand if what I about ask is true for your group. I want you to raise your hand and hold it up. How many of you had more C's than S's? And everybody raises their hand. 90 to 95% of every audience. It doesn't mean they're wrong if they had more skills than character traits, but they're all holding their hands up. And this is every single audience I've ever done had maybe minimum 80%, but usually in the 90% range, where they wrote down more character traits than skills. So then I say, okay, think about this for a moment. If every single one of you in this room was looking more at character traits than skills, then doesn't it beg the question, could that possibly be what people are looking for in you? Whether it's at a conscious or a subconscious level, what we're really looking for in people's lives is their character. In fact, I think there's probably only 3 or 4 skills you have to master in order to become successful, but there's dozens of character traits that people are looking at and making their decision about whether or not you are a person who should have influence in their lives. And so what that does is it gives us this mirror to look into. Am I a person of integrity? Am I a kind person? Am I the kind of person other people would want to follow? Instead of just trying to learn skills and pushing them on people and hoping that and the classic example, would be a used car salesman or a car salesman. You walk on the lot, this dude, man, he's got everything down pat. He knows all the answers. He's sharp. He's dressed right. The knot in his tie is perfect, not a hair out of place. But there's just something you don't trust about the guy. And you walk off the lot. All the skill set is there, but there's a question in the character. And so you walk off the lot. He didn't have influence with you because there was something about his character you didn't trust.
So good. That is so good. So I want to pivot a little bit because you've worked with some giants. I mean, in the personal development world, I think back to my early days in my 20s, I'm soaking up as much as possible from John Maxwell, Zig Ziglar, who has just an amazing voice, by the way, to listen to.
An accent.
Yeah, that's right. Jim Rohn. I mean, you've gotten to work and learn from giants. So what did they teach you about truth that still holds up today over your past, say, 30, 40 years?
Well, I don't know that they actually sat me down and said, here's something about truth, but the truth that I learned working with those 3 guys is to be myself. And people say, well, how is that a lesson you learned? Well, let's take Zig and Jim Rohn and compare them. They were both legends in the industry. Everybody knew who they were. They made the most money. They wrote the best books. They sold the most copies. They were colleagues and friends and at the highest levels in the speaking industry. And you could not find two men who were more different than Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn. Zig was a grinning and gripping. He would have made a great politician, shaking hands and kissing babies. And he was, extroverted. He walked the stage. He'd yell. He'd pump that, he would pump that water pump as he told the story. Sometimes he'd walk to the front of the stage. He'd get down on one knee and he would whisper like this. I mean, he was very dynamic. And then you have Jim Rohn, who would sit there in front of the lectern like this. And we always knew Jim was getting excited when he did his power move. And his power move was this, Josh. And we're like, holy cow, holy cow. Jim took his glasses off. Look out, here we go. Jim was an introvert. Zig was an extrovert. And when I was working with them, I realized I can't be the next Zig Ziglar. I can't be the next Jim Rohn. But I can be the best Chris Widener, and it doesn't matter what my personality is, because on one hand, you got a Jim Rohn. On the other end of the scale, you got a Zig Ziglar, and both of them are legends. And so I said, I'm going to try to be my best. I'm going to do my best. And that's the greatest truth that I learned in working with those guys was be yourself, be your unique person. And, one of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got was be a voice, not an echo.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are just echoing Zig Ziglar and echoing Jim Rohn and echoing, all the famous guys now. They're just trying to be those guys in a different skin. And the reality is you need to be a voice, not an echo. Go do your own research, develop your own thoughts. My friend Mark Sanborn, former president of the National Speaker Association, he always says, the problem with most thought leaders is they don't think. They're not coming up with their own ideas. They're just reading something and passing it along as though it's theirs.
What's fascinating about what you're saying, though? So I just finished reading the book 5 Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom. And it's a great book. I don't want to take anything away from it. And I actually highly recommend it because it's great. There's great content on how you can think about wealth differently than just money. That being said, the one complaint I have against it is it was mostly research and other people's stories and not his own.
Yeah.
And so as I'm reading it, because I just finished writing my book and it's due to come out in August, my first book, so I'm highly intrigued by how you've gotten to 25. But I'm very proud of the fact that it's my story. They're my stories and my lessons. And so I'm not saying I'm going to sell more copies than Sahil because he's killed it on this book. But I'm very proud of that it is my stories and my voice.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's shocking to me how often people will literally just quote Jim Rohn and in one of his most unique quotes as though it was their own. So whenever I see it on Facebook, I comment and I say, I love Jim Rohn. That's a great quote. But I mean, people rip people off all the time. I'll tell you a funny story. I have a really good friend, very successful keynote speaker. Most people have never heard of him, but he's doing 80 gigs a year. And he showed up after lunch to give a speech. And it is his story. His speech is his personal story. And about 4 minutes into it, he could see people talking and chatting and laughing. And he did the, how all men, we've been given a speech and we see something. And so we slowly sort of nondescriptly try to check our fly, make sure our fly isn't down or, something like that. He could not for the life of him figure out what was going on. He finally said, for the first time in 2,000 speeches, I stopped my speech in the middle. And I looked at somebody in the front. I said, there's obviously something going on. There's a problem or something. What is it? And the person in the front row said, the speaker this morning told the exact same story. The speaker in that morning did not know that my friend was going to be the afternoon speaker and told his story as though it was his own.
Oh, goodness.
And so the problem is it made my friend look like a fool. And the other guy looked like he was the guy who lived this extraordinary life. And it happens all the time. When I quote people, and I do, in my 45 to hour long keynote, I'll quote 4 or 5 other people, and I always tell who they are. Because I think when you quote other people, it makes you appear well-read. It passes along that you have integrity because you're not trying to steal their stuff. but you don't want it to be all somebody else's quote, like you mentioned this book would be. But, there's nothing wrong with quoting other people as long as you don't try to pass it off as your own. And unfortunately, a lot of people just try to pass stuff off as their own.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I was very cognizant of that in writing my book, on giving credit where credit's due and making sure that I put who said the quote that influenced my life and why it influenced my life. So no, that is really good. But you do, and I'm sure you've seen it even more than I, people in this influencer speaking space just rip people off all the time and pass it off as their own. So I want to go back to the book.
One of the biggest guys in the entire, and I'm not going to name him, but one of the biggest guys in the industry now, very, very famous, sells millions of books. There was a video done early on in his career where it was side by side of him doing these videos that went viral, and then the person who actually said it, and never gave credit. They went viral. He became famous, $1 million book contracts and everything. And all it was ripping everybody else off.
I actually think I know who you're talking about. We'll talk about it after we get off recording.
I'm not here to shame anybody, but it is people think that it's a shortcut, and for some it actually works. But it also lets people know that you don't have any integrity.
That's right. So let's, I mentioned the book thing where you've written 25 now. What is your philosophy and process as you go through that? Because I have so much respect. I put out a social media post probably 3 weeks ago, holding up my printed out version of my book saying, just when you think you're done, you're only about halfway there, because you have all the editing and all the different picking out of the layout and the cover and endorsements and who's going to write the foreword and all this different work. So I just have such a different admiration for someone that's gone through the process of writing a book the right way. And you've written 25. What's been your methodology and process in writing books and getting that many out to the world?
Well, there's sort of two camps. There's the disciplined every single day, write something. In fact, there's a guy named Chuck Swindoll. He was a pastor and a radio minister. Yeah. He's probably sold 30 million, 40 million copies of his books over the years. One of the biggest radio Bible teachers, amazing guy. He's 80 something and still pastoring a church, I think, in Knoxville, Tennessee. But they always asked him, and he said, I write one page every single day, 365 days a year. I write the page and I leave. That's how he wrote his books. And at the end of the year, he's written 365 pages. I am more of what I call an inspired writer. So I will sit down. My best-selling book of all time was a book called The Angel Inside. It was a 20,000-word fictional story about a young 28-year-old man. He's on his last day of his European vacation by himself. He's gone there to find himself. He bumps into a little old Italian man who teaches him life lessons from the life of Michelangelo. And they walk around Florence. The whole book is one afternoon. So for 9 months, I studied the life of Michelangelo. I studied the city of Florence. I studied, all those kinds of things. I wrote that book having never been to Florence, Italy. And yet it ended up, it was translated into 14 languages. It hit number 2 on the Wall Street Journal, number 7 on the New York Times, number 3 on Amazon overall, not a category. And it was just really a great book. But I did 9 months of research and notes. I narrowed down the life lessons to 10. I was kind of going, what would be a life lesson from this part of my class? Well, that would be the life lesson. I started out with like 20, brought it down to 10. And then I just sat down and I wrote it. So I cleared my schedule. I used to live in Seattle, and the Starbucks that I went to, and this was early days, when Starbucks was first beginning, and it was an old converted pizza parlor. It was like 5,000 square foot Starbucks. And I wrote 6 books in that Starbucks. And what I did was I carved my schedule out from 9 until 5 for 5 days, Monday through Friday. And I wrote 4,000 words a day. And at the end of the week, I had 20,000 words. I turned it into my publisher. They edited it and printed it. So that's sort of my strategy. I consume, and then I dump it out really fast. It doesn't matter how you do it. It matters that you find your own personal style. And then as far as just writing the book, I have a book coaching program where I walk with people and help them out. But I'll give you the example of what I use in terms of how to write your book. You're probably too young, but did you grow up with the Encyclopedia Britannica? Remember?
I'm not that young. I turned 45 in a couple of weeks. I remember encyclopedia and salespeople that would come to my parents' door. So yeah, we had them.
Yeah. So the Encyclopedia Britannica, each book's about this thick, and it's A, B, C, D, and then every year they give you they sell you the yearbook. So anyway, if you go to F and you get to frog, you're going to find like 4 or 5 pages, and they're clear plastic. And when you turn the first one over, it's just the bones of a frog. Then you take the second page, turn it over, and now you see all the organs inside the bones of the frog. Then you take the next one, and now you see all the ligaments and the sinews. Then you turn the next one over, you see the muscles. Then you turn the next one over, and you see the skin. And now it looks just like a frog. You can't see anything underneath the skin because it blocks all that other stuff out. I view writing a book that way. You start with the structure. You start with the bones. The bones is, what's the title, what's the theme of the book, and what are the potential chapters? So I'm working with a real estate investor to write his first book in Florida right now. And the very first thing I said, just write out as many as you can come up with, 20, 30, however many possible chapters you want to write. And then so he comes up with all, and we narrow it down to 10 or 12. And now he's got his bone structure. Well, what's the next thing you do? Well, next thing you want to put the organs in. So what are the stories you want to include in each chapter? What are the quotes you want to include in each chapter? What are the, what's the research? So for example, he's in the real estate investing. So he puts in research about, housing trends and, things like that and stuff like that. So it's very similar. And that's always the analogy. It's kind of a funny analogy, but I write a book the way you build a frog. And it's nice, it's simple, it's easy, and it's a structure that allows anybody to be able to write a book.
That's awesome. I did not do it that way. Probably could have used that advice, but I started writing more about the lessons that I learned through my downturn and what I wanted others to get out of my hardships. And then I went back and filled the stories in. And then I did the title because I was unsettled on it because I had never written a book before. So I wanted to get some expert guidance from some mentors, right? So, but that is a great format for people to get into. My friend John Gordon says, because he gets asked all the time, how does he churn out all these books? Does he have a ghostwriter? And he says, no, I have a holy ghostwriter. So he writes more like you write when he's inspired.
I'm great friends with John. I think I was one of the first guys to endorse the Energy Bus way back in the day. John's a great guy.
He's an amazing guy. He endorsed my book as well. Very, very grateful for him in that. And gotten to interact with him and hear him speak so many times. I introduced Energy Bus to my whole financial firm early on. And many books since then. So amazing person. Let's get into more leadership, since this is a leadership podcast. Where do you see leaders compromising the most in today's world? And what do you feel that costs them?
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind is integrity. The number one thing, the number one character trait, in fact, whether it's in my book, Art of Influence, or my audio program where we have 12, in the book there's 4, in the audio program there's 12, number one is always number one. The rest of them you can put in whatever order you want. Number one is always your integrity, because ultimately the relationship between a leader and a follower is built on trust. As soon as they don't trust you, you are no longer their leader. You no longer have their influence. So making sure that your life is in alignment with your values. And the thing I love about the word integrity is I was raised by a mom who loved doing crossword puzzles. She could do the Sunday morning New York Times crossword puzzle in 11 minutes in pen. That's the hardest one of the week, is Sunday morning. And I've seen her do it in 11 minutes with a pen. And I asked her one time, how do you do that? She goes, well, a lot of it has to do with root words. She said, I took Latin in high school, all these things. So the root word of integrity is the same root word as the old math term integer. And an integer is a whole number. So integrity means wholeness or completeness, or to look at it from the opposite direction, it means you're undivided. It means you don't tell the truth sometimes, don't tell the truth other times. Because as soon as somebody has to decide, looking at you, is this one of the times he's telling the truth, or is this one of the times he's not telling the truth? You've lost trust. And so it's important for us to understand that we have to live those values. I always say integrity is living out a single set of morals, ethics, and values, a single set. People may not even agree with your morals, ethics, and values, but they will at least know that you are always going to tell them the truth and that you are who you are and there's no hidden secrets or those kinds of things. So number one is always integrity. But another thing popped into my mind, and it has to do specifically with today, and I think that is being bold leaders. There's a lot of anti-leader, anti-success, the whole woke system of, you're privileged and all these kinds of things. And if you don't do what we say or say the right words or have the right pronouns or, whatever, we're going to cancel you. And I think there's been a little bit of fear that has crept into leaders in terms of taking a stand for what they believe, because they're like, if I say this, am I going to get canceled? If I say this, am I going to get a lawsuit? If I say this. And so I think just being bold, I think you're finding it with a lot of pastors. I think a lot of pastors in our country are afraid to tell the truth because they're afraid of being canceled or fired. And so I think boldness is a big one for us today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I want to go back to integrity for just a minute though, because you're so right. And I see so many people struggle with self-confidence, self-worth. And that what was coming to mind or heart for me as you were talking about integrity and a great definition is, how often are you living an integral life for yourself? And if the answer is some of the time, then that is where your self-confidence and self-worth issues are coming to play. Because if you don't do what you say you're going to do, regardless of how you feel, for yourself, then it's unlikely that you're going to do that for others.
Yeah,
And
people are always looking at what we say and what we believe in, and then they compare who we are. So here's an interesting thing. When other people make mistakes or they do something wrong, we look at them and we say, that person has no integrity, right? We judge them. We judge their actions, right? So somebody does something and we say that person, is a hypocrite or they don't have integrity. We judge their actions. The problem is when we look at ourselves, let's say we made a mistake, we don't consider ourselves people who lack integrity. Instead, we don't judge, we give grace. We want retribution for the other person. We want mercy for ourselves because we're not judging our actions. We're judging our intentions. The problem is that everybody else looking at us is not judging our intentions. They're judging our actions. So I think we have to become really crystal clear as leaders that while we may know our intentions, other people are just looking at our actions. They want to make sure that our words and our actions line up.
Yep. And that's why I said with these self-confidence pieces, where you get that is when you show up, that you are who you say you are.
Yep.
And your actions prove that. And that's where your self-confidence, self-worth, and the pinnacle of those is actually self-efficacy is what comes to play there. So really good conversation. So we're churning up time here. I want to get through a couple more things. Is like you've pivoted from business speaking to more revival ministry. What sparked that shift, and what are you risking pursuing that?
Well, I'm risking a lot of money because I get paid pretty well doing what I do. I've been involved in politics for a very long time. I got started when my best friend in Washington State ran for governor, and he said, "I'm just a politician. You're the professional speaker." And we ended up writing his stump speech. I spent 3 or 4 days a week with him, and then I ended up running for the U.S. Senate in 2010 during the primaries. Eventually got out of the race, but I've always been interested in politics. I believe that it's important for people to be involved in politics and to be aware of what's going on in our country. It's one of the great rights we have in America is to be involved and have a say. But after President Trump got elected, I was a big fan of President Trump. I'm good friends with his son, Don Jr., and I helped put on 7 events for him back in between his administrations. We had 45,000 people at those events. And when he got elected, I really just felt like, the world doesn't need one more political pundit. And the world doesn't need one more motivational speaker. There's like 20,000 of them in America now. But the world always needs one more person pointing people to God and helping people, in their journey through life. And having been a pastor for 14 years, from 88 to 2002, I kind of see the church today as being very weak and very anemic and not having much influence on culture. And I think there's reasons for that. And I think one of the best things for America would be a revived church, a church that takes the calling of Christ seriously and lives those principles out in the culture. And I think there's a lot of people who think they've found the truth and who haven't, particularly these college kids. What's really interesting is there's revival happening on these colleges. We're getting these little birthings of revival, these college campuses. A few years ago, in fact, Tucker Carlson finally went up and took a camera crew up there. But at Lee University up in Cleveland, Tennessee, the kids went in for chapel one day, didn't leave for 2 weeks. And they experienced a great revival. It's happening all over the country, Ohio State, Texas A&M, all over the place. And people ask me, why do you think it's happening on college campuses? And I said, because college campuses are being sold the biggest lie. And it's leaving these kids bankrupt. And they're saying, okay, free sex, the hookup culture isn't making me happy. Ayahuasca isn't making me happy. Drugs, Molly isn't making me happy. Drinking isn't making me happy. And they're left with nothing. And so they go, maybe it's Jesus. And so I think in this modern culture, we're finding people who are finding that the lives they're living are kind of devoid of meaning, and they're bankrupt, really.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I thought, the Ohio State story last year stuck out to me because it was really led by the football team, and being a former football player, it just was intriguing for me to follow. But it wasn't just the football team. There was a huge revival on the campus in general.
Yep.
And there wasn't a ton of media attention. It got some, but not a ton. And but it was really cool to follow. And what I'm seeing with young people is they are searching for meaning more than my generation did. Our generation, and I know you're a little bit older than me, but maybe you can, maybe it was a little bit the same. We found our meaning in our work. And I found through my pits of despair that tying my identity to my work, money, accolades, positional power, whatever, left me empty when it all came coming crashing down. And then I learned through that is that God, me, and it wasn't that I was never a believer. It was that I put idols above God. And the Bible's very clear in not doing that.
Here's an interesting statistic. I found this about 4 years ago. The number one demographic of people who kill themselves in America is white, affluent males. The least likely group of people to kill themselves or commit suicide is poor women of color. Now, on its surface, you would go, whoa, that's weird. Wouldn't the rich white guys be the ones who want to live their life? No, here's why. They were sold a bill of goods in college or in high school. Go to college, get a good job, make a lot of money, get a beautiful wife, have beautiful kids, buy a house in the suburb, put a white picket fence around it, buy a nice car, get a vacation home, put a boat out on the lake, and you'll be happy. So they do it. Now they're 40, 45, and they're not happy, and they don't know what to do. So they off themselves. So now you go and you look at poor women of color. Why don't they kill themselves to a great degree? The reason why is they never thought they were going to go and get rich. They never set up this straw man where they were going to go and do it, and then they'd be happy. So instead, what you find in the communities of poor women of color is their hope is in, they have a very high rate of faith. A lot of them, particularly in the Hispanic world, Catholic, in the Black world, typically, more Protestant or whatever. But their hope is in their church, their God, and their friendships and relationships. Because a lot of them are single mothers, and so they network with these other women, and they have these relationships where they strengthen each other. And so I think that that's very, very telling. And you can go look it up. The number one demographic of people who kill themselves are white affluent men, and the least amount of people who kill themselves are poor women of color. It's because of what they put their hope
in. That's fascinating. And at the same time, I can see it so true. So what's coming to heart for me is we have a lot of entrepreneurs and leaders that listen to this show. And I coach a lot of them. And they're stuck in this dichotomy of pushing for more because they've been given a purpose by God. Mm-hmm. And it's more. And there is that dichotomy or paradox, if you will, of filling out or, living into your divine purpose. And at the same time, they're also realizing that more for the sake of more isn't fulfilling them, giving them happiness.
Yeah.
So speak some words into these people that are struggling with that paradox right now.
So one of my favorite books in the Bible is the book of Ecclesiastes. And it's 12 chapters long, and it was written by King Solomon, the richest guy to ever live. If you took his wealth and converted it into current dollars, it'd be a couple $1 trillion. He could buy and sell Elon Musk many times over. And he was the king of Israel, wealthiest guy in the world to ever live. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, he undertakes a research project, so to speak. He wants to find happiness. This is where we hear the term over and over and over again. In fact, I think 38 times in 12 chapters, he says, meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. Or vanity of vanities, all is vanity, if you go back to King James. So King Solomon says, I'm going to go and try to find happiness. So he can't find happiness in wealth. He's like, the problem is you have all this money and you die and you turn it over to somebody who didn't work for it. He decides he's going to bring in court jesters and laugh. He wants to find purpose in laughter. He decides he's going to go out and build these world-class gardens. He builds these world-class gardens. Nothing helped. Women, he tries to find women. I think he had 300 wives and 700 concubines. Either that or he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Didn't make him happy. He goes through all these things, and throughout, after every single one, he says, and then I found it to be meaningless. Meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. He tried to find purpose in reading books, and his conclusion is, of the writing of books, there is no end, and there is nothing new under the sun. And meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. He gets to the very end of the book and he says, I've tried everything, I've done everything, and here's what I've concluded. Love God and obey his commandments. Don't put your hope in your money. Don't put your hope, go make money. I think wealth is a great blessing, but only if you have a relationship with God. Otherwise, it can be a great curse. Don't put your hope in money. Don't put your hope in relationships. Have great relationships. Don't put your hope in them. Always make sure, particularly if you're a Christian entrepreneur, business person, make sure that you're serving God and that God owns your business, and let him bless it. And always make sure, if God's giving you money, make sure you're tithing, giving that money back. It's honoring of God when you do that. And it's helping a lot of other people when you do that. God doesn't need your money, but he wants you to, he wants you to recognize that he's the source of that. It's funny when you talk about tithing. If you take a person who makes $1,000 a month and they give $100, that's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. If somebody's making $100,000 a month and they're giving $10,000 a month, that also is a lot of money. I think it's actually one of the brilliant things that God established by making it a percentage instead of an amount, is either way, it's a sacrifice. Because the guy making $100,000 a year who's giving $10,000 a year away, $100,000 a month, giving $10,000 a month away, he could be saying to himself, man, at the end of this year, I could buy myself a really nice car with that $120,000. Or I could pay off, a big chunk of my mortgage, or I could buy a cabin, or I could, all the things. But the idea of giving away money, number one, I think it honors God, but number two, I think it breaks the power of money that you have. Because money wants you to worship it. Money wants you to love it. Money wants you to hoard it. Money wants you to, you roll around in $100 bills in your living room. It wants to be loved. And when we send money away, we're saying, you don't control me, I control you. And so I think it's important for us to honor God with our talents and our gifts and our businesses and our marriages and all those kinds of things, but always putting them back into the hands of God.
So good, brother. So good. Thank you for those words. What's coming to mind for me now is you have such a voice in the Christian community and have for many years. What would be something in your spiritual journey that most would find surprising?
Right off the top of my head is I'm a bit of a mystic. I'm a bit of I'm a bit of a loner. Like, I'm a gregarious, put me in a crowd, I'll work the crowd, whatever. But when I'm at home and I work from home, I spend a lot of time alone. I spend a lot of time reading. I spend a lot of time praying. Most of the books I read are by dead guys. I always say I read dead guys. I very, very, very rarely read a book by somebody who's alive, because you don't know if those books are going to be universal truths that are going to last for 50 years. But if somebody's dead and has been dead for 100 years and their books still make a difference, I try to read those books, and many of those books I read over and over and over again. But the number one book in faith in my mind is a book called The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer. And this is a deep book. It's a thin book, but you don't read it in one sitting. I suggest people read a paragraph at a time, and it's like eating a meaty steak dinner. This isn't like, popping a donut in your mouth. And so I think the fact that I'm really into what they call the disciplines, the spiritual disciplines. There's some great books on the spiritual disciplines. The Challenge of the Disciplines by Richard Foster, Spirit of the Disciplines by Dallas Willard. And it talks about things like silence, solitude, prayer, meditation. The strength that you have on stage as a speaker, or the strength that you have in your workplace, comes from the time you're alone. I believe that more than I believe anything. The strength of your leadership comes from your time alone. I mentioned Mark Sanborn earlier, and Mark for 30 something years has done the same thing every day. For 15 minutes a day, he does nothing. He goes away. He sits by himself. He has a yellow legal pad and a pen. And for 15 minutes, he does nothing but think and reflect and meditate. And, think about how many countless hours over the course of 30 years he has spent alone with himself, even in a 15-minute situation, right? And so I just really challenge people, and for a lot of people, that's scary. In fact, sometimes when I'm giving a speech, I'll just say, we're afraid of silence. And then I'll just stop talking for 10 or 15 seconds. And you can start people, they're doing this, like even 15 seconds. They're like, what happened? Did his brain glitch? Why did he stop talking? I don't like this. Big auditorium. Now it's completely silent. You can kind of hear the air conditioning going or whatever. We do not like to be silent. We like noise. We like radio, music, TV, talking to people. But I think the real power in a person's life comes from when they're alone, they're silent, they're quiet, they're prayerful, they're meditating, and that's the engine for when you go out on stage. I have something that I do before every single speech that I give. I told you I grew up around the track, and I think about a horse who's about to race when I'm getting ready, literally the 3 minutes before I'm, maybe the guy's even out there giving my introduction. I get in a place where I'm quiet. I get down on my knees. I pray to God, and I say, let my words be your words. And that's my prayer. And I stand up and I think about those horses as they're walking around the track, just warming up. It's just all pre-race. They're warming up. They're kind of getting ready. And then, if you think about a horse race, the horses are all behind the gates, and they load them up one by one. And then they come in. And now that horse is locked down. He's in the gate. He's locked down. And there is a split second between the time where they close that last gate and the bell goes off. And my cousin is one of the top horse trainers in California. And so I've been around horses a lot. There's this split second, maybe a second and a half, where everything is silent. The clang of the last gate, bump, the horn goes, gates open, and you're out the gate. And it's maybe a weird one, but it's one that works for me. I try to find that casualness of trotting around the track, getting locked into the gate while the intro's being done. And then when they say, let's welcome to the stage Chris Widener, that's the gate. And I come out and I let the power of all my training and my quietness and my reflection and all those things, I let it just pour out. And I think whether you're a speaker or whether you're a business person, when you come to work and there's problems, where do you find the strength to handle those problems? The relationship problems, the financial problems. Where do you find the strength? You find it when you're alone.
You're spot on. Spot on. I teach part of my work is in EOS coaching, and we teach clarity breaks. And clarity breaks is a powerful tool, right? And it can be 15 minutes a day. It could be an hour on a Friday. Whatever it is for you, it's getting silent. Because what I've learned through the years, God whispers. And you cannot hear those whispers without you getting silent. No music, no AirPods in your ears, no phone to distract you. So what I learned to do is I took the AirPods out of my ears a number of months ago because I'm that constant productivity person, and I was listening to a podcast while I was out wrecking. Well, I found as I get home and the kids get out of bed and then I go to work and all the noise, I didn't have enough silence. So now my rucks consist of me and my thoughts and prayer with God. And that's where my downloads come. That's where I can hear those whispers. And we all need
you're
those
right.
in our life.
He whispers. He doesn't use a megaphone. Somebody turned me on to something about a year ago called the Lectio Divina. It's an old Catholic tradition of how to read the Bible, and Lectio Divina means the divine reading. And so you pick one verse, and you read it, and you meditate on the verse, and then you read it again. You meditate on the verse, and you're trying to pick up meaning from it. Then you take word by word, and you meditate on each word as you go through it. Take the most famous verse in the world, John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, whosoever believe in him would have eternal life. So for God, and you meditate, who is God? How great is God? How powerful is God? So loved. How did God love us? What is God's love like? And you can take 20 minutes just going through one passage, but what it's doing is it's allowing this communion with the Holy Spirit as we're quiet and we're alone and we're prayerfully reading something. It allows us to expand our minds and our understanding of that particular verse. And I've been doing that for about the last year. I'd never even heard of it. Somebody said, have you ever heard of the Lectio Divina? And I'm like, nope, never heard of it. But it's really a great sort of format for silencing yourself, being quiet, and really meditating on the scriptures.
Yeah, that's really good. And you could take that lesson into other areas of a business problem you're trying to solve.
Sure.
Man,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
so good. So we talked a little bit about revival earlier. What does a revived America look like to you? And how can leaders move toward that vision without falling into politics or performance?
Well, I think the most important thing is revival begins with individuals. It doesn't begin with a church. It doesn't begin with a nation. It always starts, and that's the way it is in my book. We talk about personal revival, church revival, national revival, and it always goes that way. The quickest way to bring revival is for Christians to get on their knees and confess their sins, and turn back to God. The premise of the book comes from 2 Chronicles 7:14, which says, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear their cry from heaven, then will I heal their land, and then will I forgive their sins." So what's interesting to me is that revival is it's cause and effect. We have to do something first. He says, if my people will do these four things, then will I hear from heaven and heal their land and forgive their sins. And some people say, well, that's Old Testament. Okay, well, in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, there's Jesus saying, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone would open the door, then will I come in with him and he eat with him and he with me. It's always conditional. And the onus is on us. God is always ready for revival. God wants to do amazing things in your life. He wants to show you things you've never seen. He wants you to experience things you've never experienced. My life verse is John 10:10. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. We're the problem with revival. But the way you get out of it is you humble yourself, pray, seek his face, and turn from your wicked ways. When we do that, we draw near into this relationship with God, and he begins to change us. And then he begins to change other people. And so what does revival look like in America? Well, in the book, Coming American Revival, I have what would revival look like in business? Well, people stop taking advantage of each other. What would it look like in marriage? You start loving your spouse and respecting your spouse. What does it look like in politics? Our politicians stop lying to us, telling us one thing, and as soon as they're elected, doing something else. So revival, and by the way, the word revival simply means to live again. It means to come to life again. So revival is something that happens to Christians. Conversion is something that happens to non-Christians. They convert, but revival is all about the church. And God knows that the church needs to be revived because we have bigger buildings, more people attending, more Bibles, more conferences, more podcasts, more lessons, more this, more that than any culture in the history of the world. And we are one of the weakest churches in the world today. And it's because we have built church culture. We haven't built a relationship with Christ that stems from obedience and love and relationship.
Amen. So good. One of my mentors, Andy Frisella, has this quote that personal excellence is the ultimate rebellion. and it's going towards, they want you to turn away from God, turn towards Him. They want you fat, be healthy. They want you broke, be wealthy. It's because politics is downstream of culture.
Yep.
And so very similar to what you're saying there is it's focusing on us being the best versions connected to Christ to affect and influence, like the word we've been using often throughout this podcast, those in your community and those in your family and those around you. So good. So good. All right. So last question I always ask people, and I could talk to Chris all day long, but I know we got to get running. I'm blessed for his time as it is. I always ask this at the end of the day, and it could be anything we've spoken on or anything that just comes to your heart. What's an unpopular belief that you hold to be true that most would disagree with you on?
Boy, an unpopular truth that I hold to be true. Well, I think culturally, you're, I'm sure, agree with this, but that men have been emasculated by our culture. And there's a lot of people in our culture that men need to, particularly white men, need to be crushed. And, they're people of privilege and, all this stuff. And one of the things I love to say to people, and you can, especially liberals, you can see their heads explode in real time, is, do you know who ended slavery? White, rich, Christian, Republican men. That's who ended slavery. That's who ended slavery. When white, rich, Christian, Republican men decided that this was an immoral practice that had been happening for, well, really since the beginning of time, slavery had, but in our country, and that it was an abomination to God, they put an end to it, and they went to war over it to put an end to it. Same thing over in Europe. A member of the House of Lords, William Wilberforce, he brought anti-slavery legislation to the House of Lords for 22 years, and it was always rejected. In the 23rd year, it was finally passed, and they abolished slavery in Europe. So I think we need to focus on men. We need to support men. We need to support everybody. But, when you look at the average sitcom, what is it? It's a dumb, bumbling, idiot man, and the woman saves the day every single time. Like a caricature of the modern sitcom is King of Queens. Bumbling,
Yeah.
and the father is just this grumpy old man, and she saves the day on everything. She's smarter, she's better, she's all that stuff. And there has been a cultural attempt to take away the role of men. And I say this in church all the time. I tell people in church all the time, pastors all the time, you need to work on the men. Thank God women have stepped up and carried the work of the church while men go off and work and they write their check, but they don't work in the church. They don't lead in the church. And you find the strongest churches in America are the ones where men step up and actually take their roles seriously. So I have a big heart for men and helping them find God's purpose for themselves, not in any way, shape, or form to put down women at all. God loves men and women equally. He just has different roles for them. And that's an unpopular opinion, I think, for a lot of people today.
Yeah, you're right. I 100% agree. But to that point, last night, this is so ironic. I was talking about this with, I run this book and bourbon club, bunch of entrepreneurs, and we were reviewing Sahil's book that I mentioned earlier. And I got on this I don't remember how we got on the conversation, but I talked about it. I was like, from the very outset, we teach young girls how to be treated by a man. We teach our young boys how to treat women as they grow. And no one is teaching girls or boys how to treat a man.
Yep, exactly. And I have 5 girls, and I have taught every single one of those girls. I'm like, this is going to be different for you because it's not your natural understanding, because you as a female, you have different wiring. But here's the way men really work, right? And it's baffling to a lot of people, particularly to a lot of women. But I think it's important for us to teach men how to be great leaders, teach them how to be great husbands. It's also important for us to teach women how to be great wives. And so, there's a lot of terms that we use. In fact, I think even a lot of conservative Christian men use this term. I hate the term. Oh, your better half. your better half. There is no better half. My wife and I are equals. My wife is smart, but so am I. My wife is kind, but so am I. There is no better half. I'm not lucky to have her any more than she's lucky to have me, right? But there's this constant sort of pressing men down, or they'll see your wife and go, boy, you sure outkicked your coverage there. When was the last time somebody said to a woman, boy, you sure outkicked your coverage there, right? Your spouse is so much better than you. There's so many things that we do that sort of negate men in the world. And I want us to get to the point where we recognize the value of everybody, the men and the women. And that we're all trying to make a difference in the world, and we're all responsible for our families and making our families good and upholding strong marriages and those kinds of things. But we need to quit talking bad about men. We need to start giving them power and teaching them godly rules and the ways of the scriptures so that they will be these godly leaders.
Oh, you're so right. And because even when we say that, we're meaning to be complimentary.
Right.
And I've been guilty of saying that.
Me too.
Because I worked with salespeople all my life, and salespeople sales dudes, I should say, tend to marry up because they're good at sales. Yep. That being said, that doesn't mean that you're not an equal. So it's like figuring out ways that you can say and be complimentary without negating what you bring to the table.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there is ways to compliment others without having to negate yourself. So I think it's one of the biggest problems of the feminist movement is the feminist movement drags men down. You don't need to drag men down to lift women up. We want our men to be strong, but we also want our women to be strong. In fact, it was interesting. I used to do this podcast, 5 or 6 years ago. And we were reading through this article that this feminist woman, like a hardcore, well-known feminist, and she said it was really interesting. They were talking about what kind of men they like. They like strong men. And there was a saying in there, this phrase that she said, the problem with most feminist women is their heart wants what their mind tells them they shouldn't want. So cerebrally, they're like, oh, I don't want an alpha male. I want a beta male. I'm not going to be under the thumb of some man, blah, blah, blah. Then they see a strong man and their heart yearns for it. And I thought it was a fascinating admission by a global leader in the feminist movement.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So as we wrap this up, where can our audience support you? Whether it be, social media, books, however you think there, or however you want to take that, where can we best support you?
Sure. Well, they can go to comingamericanrevival.com. That'll take them right into my Amazon page for that book. And then they can click on my name, see all the books and stuff. If you want me to come and speak or whatever, chriswidener.com. You can email me, chris@chriswidener.com. Or for coaching and things like that, chriswidenercoaching.com. But I answer all my own emails. In fact, one of the best lessons I ever got was, and this was pre-email, but he told me he was the CEO of Mars Candies, and they were doing $30 billion a year in the early 90s. When I first met him, he said, Chris, always answer your own phone. And I tested him once. I called the headquarters in McLean, Virginia, and I said, I'd like to talk to, I named his name, and they said, I'll put you right through. Bam, he answered his own phone. And so I answer my own emails. I answer my own phone. There's other things that I have people take care of, but I always am accessible. If you dial my 1-800 number, I'm the guy that'll answer it. It comes right into my cell phone. But yeah, if there's any way I can help anybody, please just let me know. LinkedIn is great. I've got, 24,000 connections or something like that. But that's where I'm doing a lot of my posting now, is on LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, that's good to know as well. So everyone give him a follow on LinkedIn. Go and get that book. I mean, Chris spit out a lot of great wisdom for us all today. Appreciate your time so much, Chris. This has been a tremendous conversation. And Spartans, you know what to do. Share this episode far and wide. Remember that good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.